So, the Diablo 4 Season 1 patch is upon us, and it is disgusting. Everyone hates it, but I want to let everybody know I understand exactly what's going on, and that doesn't make me any happier. So, basically, what's happening is Blizzard Corporate is panicking. So, I'll go through a little bit of the patch. I'm sure there's about 40 videos up online of it now. I'm not going to go through everything, but essentially, what's happening with this patch is your damage has gone down 50%, your survivability's gone down about 50%, and leveling speed, actual EXP for mobs, has gone down a significant amount as well. And I understand why they're doing this. So the reason they're panicking is because Blizzard, like all major video game companies now, has to answer to its stockholders. And so what do stockholders want? They want more for less. They want minimum investment and maximum profit. And so they sit up in their boardrooms with professional psychologists designing the cheapest video games they can make. Obviously, they still spend a ton of money on these that will maximize a user's engagement and addiction so they can sell you a battle pass and, of course, cosmetics and the shop. So what's happening with Diablo 4 now is they've gotten all the money out of the casuals. You know, they got their $70 from God knows how many millions of people for, I'm not going to say it was a bad game. It was a decent game. You could even say it was a good game, but $70, I don't know. I wouldn't call it the single player experience of a lifetime. But conveniently for this game, they forced you to go online for no reason, since there's absolutely no social systems in place. And they did that, of course, so they could sell you a battle pass and cosmetics out of the shop. The reason why Blizzard is panicking is because nobody is buying those. Believe me, I don't need to see their internal memos. I know nobody's buying those. Why is nobody buying those? I kind of saw this coming when the game was released. There's no reason to buy a seasonal pass or cosmetics. The reason why there's no reason is the game has no endgame. There's no social structure. There's no raids, there's no competitive, it's essentially a single-player experience, kind of in a reflection of Diablo 2. So, I don't know how they missed this fact when they were designing this game, but if I have no one to show off my cosmetics to, why would I buy them? What, so they see me in town while I'm selling my loot? Which reminds me, none of the quality of life stuff we've been begging for 2 months now is in here, of course. And then, of course, why would I buy a battle pass? To be competitive with who? To join who in the late game raid with who? There's no reason. What, for the PvP scene that doesn't exist? So there's no reason to buy either of these things, and Blizzard is extremely upset because they want this to be their cash cow. And yes, it was a cash cow initially, but now it's not. So there's two ways to solve this, actually, and this kind of reminds me of that pyramid where it's like you've got cheap, fast, and good, right? And you can only pick two. Now, we know Blizzard is always going to pick cheap because they've got to answer to those stockholders and maximize their profit. Now, good is going to take a lot of time. Good is the endgame fun social activities, PvE or PvP, that I'm sure they're gradually going to develop, right? But that's going to take a long time. So now we only have cheap and fast. So the cheapest and fastest possible way to extend the lifetime of this game, and they have to do that because they want to maximize your engagement, because when they maximize your engagement, you keep playing and you have a chance of buying the battle pass or cosmetics. So what they've done is they've essentially made it to where it's going to take twice as long to get to endgame. You're going to do half the damage, take more damage, it's going to take twice as long to level, and the reason they're doing that, follow the money, there's no other reason they're doing this, is if you're playing for twice as long, there's a double chance you're going to buy that battle pass. There's a double chance you're going to buy that cosmetic. That's exactly why this is happening. Don't believe anything else. This is why they're doing this, because people have leveled up too fast, or they're casuals and they're gone anyway, and they realize there is nothing to be offered out of endgame. So they're doubling that time. Now, we've been sitting here for a minute. You know, I can kind of go over the patch notes, but I'm going to do it really briefly. Once again, there's a lot of other people talking about this. I'm not going to go over a ton of class stuff. 6 new unique items. There's another uber unique that no one will ever see ever. I mean, I really wish I had the job of the guy who designs these. It's amazing. Play the game your entire life, you will never see one of these drop. So this is the same as nothing. There's a couple of semi-interesting uniques here. This does remind me, I probably won't open up that screen, I did see the list of the 32 heart aspects coming for Season of Malignant. Half of them are just bad. Half of them are actually very interesting. I think it's less overpowered and much more the possibility to create interesting builds, and that's probably the best thing about it, because interesting builds is really all the genuine pleasure this game has anymore. So I think there are some genuinely interesting Malignant aspects, and there are some strong ones. But as I talked about the 50% less damage before, at best, those are going to up your damage maybe 10%. So we're still at negative 40% damage. And at best, the defensive aspects from the Malignant Hearts are going to maybe get you another 10%. So once again, you're taking 40% more damage than you were before. So we're way behind here. Once again, more game, more grind, more slog. So hopefully you buy that battle pass. None of the other uniques. I mean, there are good, these are interesting. The lidless wall is definitely an interesting one. The Oculus, man, there's been some great memes on this already. Baldur's Gate 3, baby, and I'll talk about that later. The aspects are okay. Every 20 seconds stuns, interesting for crowd control builds, but of course they nerfed that. Increasing your movement speed greatly with that. You can use Penitent Greaves. Once again, I'm not going to go over all these. Let's go over the important stuff. So people got new aspects. They got some new legendaries. Lots of bug fixes, but let's get down to the really important stuff. Also, classes in general. When I looked over the classes, nerfs, and buffs, there's a lot of tiny little buffs to a lot of skills that don't really make any difference, and there's a lot of one or two major nerfs to most of the overpowered class skills. We saw a lot of those coming, like Bone Spear, but nevertheless, there's still a lot of broken shit in the game. There's still Storm Werewolf Druid. There's still, Twisting Blades, Bursting Venom, Poison Rogue. But don't worry, Blizzard will get to those eventually, and then everybody will be terrible. The biggest thing coming down here, we can just lock through. Woo, this is a big patch note. This is kind of where it starts. So, for instance, they basically completely killed power leveling, right? You pay someone to level your character from 1 to 50 in like an hour through a tier 4 dungeon. It's a carry. That's gone. That doesn't exist anymore. The reason why it doesn't exist anymore, because if you get to 50 too fast, you're going to get to 70 and 80 too fast. You're going to realize there's nothing to do. You're going to play another game. You're not going to buy the battle pass. Okay, that's why they've done that. So they've dropped experience across the board. It went from 15% to 1.5%. From 3 levels higher, Nightmare, which everybody was doing, is the fastest leveling method. Now it's 15% for 10 levels. Actually, no. So if you go 3 levels higher, it's 4.5%. But then also somewhere here, and I may have missed it, just mob EXP in general went down, so it's just going to take much, much longer. And then, yes, this is the power leveling stuff. In Helltide, they greatly raised the cost of the Gift of Mysteries, which was the only chest worth getting. So instead of making the other chests good, and they were good for about 5 minutes when you could target farm uniques, which is something this game desperately needed, they had the whole Shaco problem. So 100 people got Shacos, which is more than probably anyone will get in the game's lifetime. And they stopped doing that instead of actually being creative and trying to write some new code so everybody could target farm. By the way, speaking of Uber Uniques, if anyone is still playing this game in a year, don't worry, they're going to change that. Nobody's happy about the Uber Uniques. It's a bunch of BS. They will up the drops on that one day. So Helltide is a disaster. There's also currently people playing it. There's absolutely no, whatever they call those little, aberrant cinders dropping at all, but maybe that's a bug. Personally, I think it's an intentional bug. I think they put it in, so then when they fix that, they're going to say, oh, look, we did something good. But in general, Helltide is just less for more time investment. You got to do it the whole hour now to open up one goddamn chest, and of course you need that to reroll. On top of that, they've added more affixes to your armor and weapons, so now it's going to cost you even more multiple millions to reroll a good item. But we'll get to that in a minute. So balance updates, once again, I'm not going to go over every class. There's a couple of major abilities and interactions nerfed, but in general, lots of little buffs that are ultimately pretty meaningless. I think they nerfed aspect of Retribution for that stun damage because there's a stun Malignant Heart coming, and that would have been really good, which is too bad. Exploiters for PvP. They did greatly boost Starlight aspect, which is actually really strong with Rogue, with the momentum aspect that heals you per stack of momentum. I'm not going to make a new video on my Rogue build, but if you're watching this because you watch my Rogue build, I'll tell you at the end what I think you should do for the season if you are still playing. They upped a couple of item drop chances. Nightmare Dungeons, once again, is the only thing to do in endgame, so they increased the rewards for that. Great, but at the same time, and it's interesting to talk about it, I think the psychologists who designed this game are really masters, because something I noticed in the weeks and weeks that I played, at some point I wasn't having fun anymore, but I just kept playing. It's this amazing feeling where you're addicted to playing it, even though you're not getting any joy out of it. So that's a masterful compliment I can give to them, but I really hope that one day they flip that around. However, and this has been an up-and-coming thing with a lot of games now. I was going to launch into this speech at the end, but quite frankly, it's the same as the classic Tim Jobs speech. The people who designed the quality product at the beginning have long since gone. They've forgotten what made these companies, billion-dollar companies in the first place, and now all the marketers are in charge, and it's just all about maximizing profit. There's no vision, there's no creation anymore, and quite frankly, there's no fun except the fun that's been expertly designed by Blizzard psychologists to maximize your engagement, like any other game. And quite frankly, I'm just starting to heavily consider if I do play games anymore, and games were my life for a very long time, I'm really just thinking about single-player offline games that have an ending. Because, then it's like reading a book. It's reading a great book. You get that dopamine drip. It's the most amazing thing in the world. And then you finish and you can move on with your life and save your failing marriage and maybe do something, I'm not even going to say productive, some interest, some passion that you have that might improve your standing of your life, your community, move on. But I'm giving this speech a little too soon. Coming down here, yeah, they upped the monster HP, went up, the scaling went up. Oh yeah, this is where they give you more affixes for your rolls that most classes wouldn't even want, so this is going to cost you millions. And here's where we get into the real meat of what this patch was all about. This wasn't about the class changes. This is where they redesigned the game to make it take twice as long. So, dexterity, strength, willpower, the main stats, which were a huge multiplier in your damage buckets, just got cut in half on weapons, and that's where you get a large majority of those extra stats. So that went from 50 to 25%, and overall, you're probably going to end up losing 10% dexterity on your character, okay? Cooldown reduction. The biggest thing about this is cooldown reduction was fun. It wasn't just powerful, it was fun. So they're nerfing that 30% to give you some kind of more optional choices, but it's still the best stat. It's just worse now, right? Now we come down here, critical strike damage, reduced across the board 17%. Now 17%, not that much, and then we get to the big one, vulnerable damage, negative 40%. Every piece of gear that you had rolled vulnerability damage on is now 40% weaker, and then if we go down here, oh baby, a real slap in the face to rogues and any class that's using a one-hander. Critical strike damage on swords, minus 50%. Vulnerable damage on crossbows, minus 65%. You know what that's targeted at? That's targeted at rogues. And baby, that hurts. Ooh, oh my gosh. Now, here is the problem with these, and there's of course many more other nerfs, but this is the big thing right now that people aren't talking about as much. They literally said that they were doing this, and I agree that vulnerability damage was broken. It was so powerful, as was critical strike, but that's because it's part of those separate damage buckets, okay? They said they were doing this to increase build versatility. And on the flip side down here, they've buffed the additive damage multipliers that are hyper-specific. Here's the problem. These are additive damage multipliers, so they're worth far less, and buffing them by 25%, it's a general 25% buff across the board, is really upping your power maybe 5% at the end of the day. What this is creating is kind of more hyper-specific builds where you're going to have to look for certain items, but that's not the case, and I'll tell you why that's not the case. Because they haven't changed the underlying mechanics of how vulnerability, crit, and your main stat multiply your damage, all this has done is make vulnerability and critical strike worse, but you still absolutely need them. They're still absolutely your best in slot. And in fact, you now can't even do anything cool with it because maybe you had some really interesting, unique, like a Shira's Kanja or some weapon, some ring that you wanted to wear, but you'd be sacrificing some crit damage and some vulnerability damage. Before, let's say you had 300% vulnerability damage, okay? Sacrificing 30 or 40%, sure, it hurts, but it's not going to kill you. Now, At best, maybe you can get plus 100 vulnerability damage. So sacrificing that 20% ring or weapon or whatever else, it hits like a truck. It's like you've just sacrificed an overall 20% of your damage, where before you were sacrificing 10%. So you're just worse across the board. And, you know, I should have done this first, but just in terms of a calculator, and I'll probably also put this on the screen so you understand. In terms of damage buckets, how it worked was, and let's say your main stat was 10, right? And then times your vulnerability damage, so that's 10. And then times your crit damage, so that's 10. And then times all your other additive multipliers. They get added together. They don't get multiplied. So damage to close, damage to poison, damage over time, damage over this, damage to distant enemies, whatever. They all get added together. So that's another 10, right? So 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, we got 10,000 damage, right? So what these nerfs have done is pretending to give you more, but actually you've been given far less, because here's what happened. So your main stat got reduced on all of your weapons by a huge amount. What was it? Like 50%, right? So before, where you had 10, now let's be generous, okay? Let's not even be that harsh. Let's be generous. I think it's more than this. Let's say you've got 8, okay? Now it's times your vulnerability damage. Vulnerability damage across the board went down 40%, plus weapons got heavily nerfed with it too. So let's say that's a 5 now, right? And then your critical strike damage also get nerfed, but it was a small amount. It wasn't crazy. So let's say that's a 9 now, right? So what is it? 8 times 5 times 9. And now you've got these 25% buffs to all these additive multipliers, right? So let's be really generous. I would have said 12, because I think that's where it's at, but let's say 13. Let's be really generous, okay? So times 13. So you know what you end up with? You end up with less than half the damage you had before, okay? And that is not fun to me. It's not fun to take twice as long to kill something as I did before. I don't have as much as a problem with the horrendous armor and damage reduction nerfs. I think it potentially could be fun to be killed easier. That's at least some kind of fun challenge, despite the fact I think a lot of people are not going to think it's fun. But this I do have a problem with. It's just the mobs have the same health. In fact, their health got buffed. I get less experience, and it's going to take more than twice as long to kill them. And once again, the reason they are doing this, there is no end game. There's nothing to engage you, so they're going to make it take that much longer to get there while they desperately try to come up with a better endgame solution, so you'll buy the Battle Pass. Coming down here, okay, there's all the 25% buffs, and that's it. Oh, and then here's the big ones here. Total armor reduced by 30%, and also the aspect of armor was nerfed by a further, it was like a 40% nerf. So your armor is 60% of what it once was, and then on top of that, all your damage reduction got nerfed. So now it's 75% of what it once was. So it nets you, in general, about a 50% damage loss. So something that would kill you in 2 hits before now kills you in 1 hit. So this is the end of my rant. I know exactly why they did this. They know exactly why they did this. I don't care what they say. You have to follow the money, and this is what they're doing. And the only conclusion I have to this video is you already bought Diablo 4. It's your life. It's your time. If you're having fun, play it. That's awesome. If you're not having fun, quit. Maybe come back in a year when there's a lot of quality of life changes. It's fun to play again, level a character for a season. But really, I think we're all getting older, and I think the quality of all these games is going down over time quite a bit. And once again, I think most modern games are now formed in a boardroom by psychologists and marketing executives. No one is there with a creative vision or a desire to create something so great that it will automatically make a ton of money, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with profits. But it's like modern movies. I think the video game industry is exactly like modern movies. You know, political correctness is coming before quality, before story, before gameplay. And in this case, it's just straight money. There's plenty of extra politically correctness to go around. So, you know, my advice to you, if you're struggling with a lot of modern games, and I would also add that if a game is free to play, I have no problem with it having the most predatory practices in the world, because it was initially free to play. Blizzard has pulled off a miracle by charging us a full $70, $10 more, though that is the way things are going, for a AAA game, which quite frankly wasn't all that amazing as a first-player experience, and now they want to make their money on the back end. And if you're me and you're getting a little older and you're looking back in your life and you realize that the 30% of your adult life you've spent playing video games probably could have gone towards something better. Once again, I'm not just talking about hobbies. I'm not talking about you could have became president, just maybe an interest that you used to have you don't do anymore. Maybe it's time to put that aside, play single-player games. I look forward to seeing you at Baldur's Gate 3, or maybe not, because I'll tell you right now, CRPGs are my absolute crack cocaine meth of video games, because it combines both of my extreme loves, which is the story and gameplay and effects and majesty of the old JRPGs, and also turn-based, which I think was a mistake for them to lose, and it combines that with an incredibly complex and intricate set of character rules and feats and classes and builds you can make. So, I mean, baby, I'm just going to lock the door for 3 weeks and not come out, which isn't all that healthy, but at the very least, that game will have an ending. If you are watching this because you liked my rogue build, I had a little note here for the coming season because I'm not going to make a video again. Personally, due to the armor nerfs, I might consider replacing the barrier aspect or even the armor aspect with the aspect of soul and vigor, which is very powerful now. That's the momentum healing aspect. And you might combine that with Starlight aspect on your rings to replace the stun from opportunist aspect. You'll get a ton of resources. And when I looked at the Malignant Hearts, something stuck out very clearly to me, which is running Creeping Death, cluster munitions, and that's why you don't really need to run opportunist aspect anymore, and clip shot for insane amounts of crowd control effective damage. And that is in fact the one thing I missed in this video. By far the most useful, by far the best additive damage multiplier was crowd control damage, and it was great. They nerfed that by 30%, and instead, once again, they buffed all these useless hyper-specific damage effects. The only good thing about this, you know, if they had truly buffed these maybe by 50, 60, 70%, where it became something that even overcame the vulnerability multiplier, that at least would make it an interesting loot hunt where you're hyper-specializing in a character that only does poison damage and only does fire damage. So you're looking for pieces of gear that do fire damage. That would at least would be a fun loot hunt in the mission to make a build and keep you engaged. But right now it's not nearly enough. The broken damage multiplier bucket mechanics are still in place, so vulnerability and crit is still the best stat. Do yourself a favor. If you're having fun, keep playing. If not, take a break. See you guys on the other side. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.